Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents What We Know, Solutions from Our Experiences in the Justice System. Edited by Vivian Nixon and Daryl V. Atkinson. Narrated by Janina Edwards, David Sadzin, and Timothy Andrés Pabon. Introduction. Vivian Nixon and Daryl V. Atkinson. Far too many people can rattle off the numbers describing the problems of the criminal legal system with startling ease. Almost 2.3 million people are confined in prisons and jails across the United States today. 1 in 3 black men born today will be imprisoned in their lives. Over the last 40 years, the number of incarcerated women has increased by more than 700%. More than 70 million Americans are living with a criminal record. It is easy to take these numbers at face value and read past them without acknowledging the human meaning behind them. The statistics come across as sterile and impersonal. But for us, this problem is deeply personal. The editors would like to note that while the term criminal justice system is most commonly used to refer to the system of law enforcement in this country, the system has historically demonstrated a failure to achieve true justice. As such, the editors intentionally use criminal legal system to refer to the current system. We each spent more than 3 years in prison. We each had our experience coming face to face with the reality that people in poverty, people of color, and those without access to education and opportunity are grossly overrepresented in the criminal legal system. And unlike many of the men and women we were incarcerated with, we both had support systems to welcome us home. Whether it was a family to provide us with the most immediate needs of food, shelter, and clothing, or an organizational support system like college and community fellowship, we both had the opportunity to pursue a higher education upon release. We earned our degrees, one in law, the other in nonprofit management, followed by an MFA, and have since dedicated our careers to advocating for justice reform. We served our sentences, and we came home with a deep understanding, not just of the failures of the criminal legal system, but also the infinite potential of the people who are relegated to our country's prisons and jails. Most Americans agree that the criminal legal system must be transformed if it is to become a system of justice, but only a select group of people have been invited to the table to imagine innovative solutions. People with conviction histories are barred from access to education and employment, and in many states are denied the right to vote. Basic tools that are necessary to advocate for oneself are out of reach for most people who have been involved in the criminal legal system. The designation, criminal justice reform expert, has been narrowly attributed to academics and practitioners, the lawyers, judges, police, and politicians. But those perspectives often see only one side of this complex problem. To our detriment, we as a country have largely failed to recognize the expertise and potential of incarcerated people and people with conviction histories. That is why, since coming home, we've dedicated our careers not just to fixing the system, but to amplifying the voices of those who are closest to the problem. Now, one of us leads the very same organization that was there in a time of need, College and Community Fellowship, which helps women who've been affected by the criminal legal system to earn their college degrees so that they, their families, and their communities can thrive. The other runs Forward Justice, which advances racial, social, and economic justice by partnering with human rights organizations at the forefront of social movements in the U.S. South. Together, we serve on the steering committee of the formerly incarcerated Convicted Peoples and Family Movement, a network of over 50 civil and human rights organizations that are led by people living with criminal records and their family members. We believe that directly impacted people can bring the solutions to that transformation we seek. The voices of currently and formerly incarcerated people are so much more than the traumas we've experienced. Those who have not been directly impacted should respect our expertise, listen to what we have to say, and take the opportunity to step back and allow us to lead a movement for change. Justice-involved people have been the source of many policy ideas that are now considered central tenets of criminal justice reform. But our contributions have often gone unrecognized. Ban the Box, for example, the campaign to remove the checkbox that asks a job candidate about their conviction history, was developed by a coalition of formerly incarcerated people who had experienced discrimination in hiring and struggled to get jobs. Since the movement began in 2003, over 150 cities and the majority of states have implemented Ban the Box policies. In 2018, Desmond Meade, a person with a criminal history, led a collaborative campaign that restored voting rights to 1.4 million Floridians. The erasure of citizenship and the sense of invisibility it triggered drove thousands of activists to demand the right to civic participation. The essays in this book offer ideas to change policy and practice in the criminal legal system. All the authors are currently or formerly incarcerated. Some suggest bold, sweeping transformations, and others aim to change a specific practice that is centered in the author's experience. They are compiled from an open call for submissions to writers inside and outside of prisons and jails. The only requirements were that authors be currently or formerly incarcerated, and that they propose a policy solution connected to their direct experience with the justice system. In just 4 months, we received over 300 essays from 35 states across the country. We handpicked the 23 pieces collected here, concrete solutions to some of the hardest and ugliest problems in the criminal legal system. In this book, you hear from a man currently incarcerated in Indiana who proposes a Prison Labor Standards Act, calling for an end to prison slave labor and a greater respect for the dignity of incarcerated workers. You also hear from a Nebraska man who served a federal prison term for white-collar crimes and now has a proposal for offering courses in entrepreneurship as a way to break down barriers to employment for people returning from incarceration. A formerly incarcerated woman who now leads a nationally prominent justice reform organization pleads for greater empathy and understanding the human dignity of justice-involved individuals. And a man serving a 25-year term for a crime he committed at age 15 powerfully advocates for getting rid of existing financial incentives to charge youths as adults. These, and the other essays in this volume, lay bare the truth of how deeply flawed our current system is, and each essay uses the author's personal story to draw a line to a policy solution that would bring a degree of dignity, fairness, and actual justice to this nation's criminal legal system. We acknowledge that some of the authors included here have caused harm to others, but the underlying foundation of this work is that those actions do not negate their expertise and ability to develop sound and profoundly necessary policy recommendations. We, the editors of this book, do not necessarily agree with every aspect of every reform suggested in these pages. Often, we do not feel they go far enough. For instance, Aaron Stritz, in Chapter 5, advocates for a 2020 plan, making parole a possibility for people who were incarcerated in their teens and have completed 20 or more years in prison. We think that a 20-year sentence for a teen is excessive and out of step with the rest of the world. We would not want to see that become an acceptable minimum before parole is considered. Likewise, in Chapter 16, Sridhar Padaratsu advocates for more basic literacy instruction in prison, which we endorse, but also suggests adding illiteracy as a factor to be considered in risk assessments, which we do not endorse. We were struck by the very modest nature of some of the proposed reforms, which seem to speak to a disturbing acceptance of a disproportionately punitive system. And we were surprised and disheartened not to receive any submissions calling for the complete abolition of prisons and detention centers, though this may have been a function of the way we worded our initial request for proposals, including the idea that we hope for new reform ideas not currently in circulation. All of that said, our approach was not to solicit pieces with particular arguments, but to defer to the contributors in proposing their reforms and to practice what the book preaches about listening to and respecting the wisdom of those who know. We hope that these ideas ground you in the understanding that no one should be defined by their mistakes alone. Civil rights lawyer Brian Stevenson said, "Proximity has taught me some basic and humbling truths, including this vital lesson: each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." This book, in fact, all of our work, is rooted in the principle that every person has great potential if only it is nurtured and given the opportunity to flourish. We hope that currently and formerly incarcerated people and people with conviction histories will read this book and see it as proof that we have a central role in the fight for reform. We hope that policymakers will take this book as a call to action to implement policies in their own institutions and intentionally bring directly impacted people to their decision-making tables. Collectively, we have reached a critical point where the justice reform movement can no longer ignore or discount the voices of the people who are most intimately familiar with the criminal legal system. We must be front and center in the fight to end mass incarceration, because we bring the necessary urgency and innovative strength that the movement requires. This is what we know, and we know it better than anyone else. A note from the editors. We would like to take a moment to note the importance of language. Language commonly used to describe people who have been involved with the criminal legal system can often be dehumanizing and degrading. We as editors hold ourselves and our colleagues to a standard of using people-first language, including people who are currently or formerly incarcerated, justice involved, directly impacted, or system impacted. American society at large has become overly accustomed to using terms that strip dignity and identity from people with conviction histories by using words like inmate, convict, or felon. However, we defer to each individual author in this book on their preferred language to describe themselves and those with whom they are or have been incarcerated. As such, this book employs a wide variety of terms. Additionally, it is important for the reader to understand that this book draws the connection between personal experience and policy development. Each essay reflects the author's own research and personal recollections. Each essay describes events in the author's lives as truthfully as recollection permits, and/or can be verified by research. We commend each of these authors for their willingness to share their stories and join with us in this endeavor to center the voices of people who have been directly impacted by the justice system. Vivian Nixon and Daryl V. Atkinson.
1. Earmark jobs to reduce recidivism. Kevin E. Jackman. Kevin Jackman is currently serving a life sentence in Massachusetts for armed robbery and felony murder. Jackman experienced firsthand the consequences of a criminal conviction after his first stint of incarceration, when he was paroled in 1995 and unable to find a job, despite his experience and skills as a machinist in the U.S. Navy. To combat recidivism, he proposes to earmark entry-level state jobs for returning citizens in automotive repair, culinary arts, cosmetology, barbering, landscaping, farming, and construction. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? In 1995, after being paroled on a drug distribution conviction, I applied for a position at a pool, plumbing, and pipe fitting company for which I was uniquely qualified. 4 years as a machinist mate in the U.S. Navy had immersed me in engineering, A school and C school training, hundreds of repair orders known as 2 kilos, and countless hours of preventative maintenance had given me knowledge of engineering tolerances less than 1,000th of an inch, boiler main feed pumps capable of 1,200 foot-pound steam at 975 degrees, and other highly specialized professional expertise. I also possessed intimate knowledge of almost every type of valve known to man. The owner of the small pipe fitting company concluded my interview by saying, "Kevin, you're the most impressive applicant I've interviewed all day. I have one more interview and 2 open positions. You pass the background check, and I'll guarantee you $15 an hour starting next Monday." Needless to say, I never heard from him again. In the weeks that ensued, I trudged through additional interviews at different companies, only to get the same result. Potential employers were sufficiently impressed by my qualifications, but were similarly disappointed to learn of my 32-month incarceration. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? My transformation from ex-military to ex-con, pipefitter to reoffender, follows a pattern many others like me have experienced because of the difficulties of bouncing back from that first misstep, that first criminal conviction. Thousands of citizens have committed petty or nonviolent crimes, done their time, and then struggled to find gainful employment, only to fall back on their tendencies toward crime after encountering obstacles they could not overcome. A prior conviction is the job seeker's albatross, a scarlet letter on every application, thwarting a desire to do right. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? With a little foresight, frugality, and a big change in thinking, the justice system and society in general can dismantle this particular obstacle, effectively reducing the soaring rate of recidivism. My personal experience and insight as a recidivist has helped me identify certain policies that can be implemented to help released inmates become productive members of society and avoid reoffending. For one, education and vocational training should be mandatory for inmates within 2 years of their release date. Focusing resources on instruction and occupations where background takes a back seat to skill prepares inmates to acquire good-paying jobs, increasing their chances of overall success, and in turn reducing their likelihood of reoffending. Fields well suited for this include automotive repair, culinary arts, cosmetology, barbering, landscaping, farming, and construction trades. Additionally, a state's legislature should earmark a percentage of state jobs for ex-cons only. Designated entry-level jobs should be obtainable through some type of post-release supervision, perhaps probation or parole, and be spread throughout the state so as not to be concentrated in any one community or town. The number of jobs for this group would be equivalent to only 1% of the state's inmate population. The number of available positions should increase or decrease in proportion to current inmate population levels. The position should offer the same pay, benefits, and opportunities for advancement as do positions occupied by employees without criminal records. This will allow ex-offenders to prove themselves and gain the experience necessary to move on to other employment opportunities. States can reduce the 1% commitment by contracting an appropriate number of private companies to hire ex-cons in return for tax breaks and other incentives, such as reduced utility rates or improved infrastructure. And finally, certain private sector job applications should be purged of any questions inquiring about or in any way identifying prior convictions. No more have you ever been convicted of a felony on applications for entry-level positions. A common-sense approach is necessary to achieve the main goal of providing ex-cons with employment opportunities without enticing anyone to reoffend. Victim-sensitive jobs, such as positions at daycares, schools, banks, and so on, will require exemptions. No one is proposing a child molester take on crossing guard duty or a bank robber drive for Brinks. Detractors may protest the merits of employing an ex-con over someone without a criminal background, to which I say, the vast majority of incarcerated persons will leave prison someday. It's better to employ them rather than avoid them. Would an average citizen rather encounter an ex-con who's gainfully employed and legally earning an income, or one who's unemployed and forced to obtain funds illegally? Consider the robbery I eventually committed after numerous failed attempts to get a job upon my release. My crime had a direct impact on over 20 people, employees, patrons, and first responders, putting them in a life-or-death situation. Everyone, including me, was affected, including family and friends. That's hundreds of people adversely affected because potential employers refused to overlook my sale of 2 dime bags of marijuana. I'm not shifting blame here. My choice, my actions, led to consequences. Period. However, had I been gainfully employed, I would not have resorted to robbing a restaurant. Money was my motive, and $15 an hour would have been enough to make my crime unnecessary. Working, plumbing pools and repairing boilers, would have kept me from taking the incremental steps that eventually led me to commit an ill-advised robbery and re-enter prison. Imagine implementing the above suggestions. Training inmates in conviction-friendly occupations, allocating state jobs for ex-offenders, and deleting conviction indicators on job applications. Doing this for 100 inmates could prevent hundreds of crimes. That's thousands of everyday citizens not adversely affected. Thousands of people not becoming victims. Thousands living a happier life in a more peaceful world because hundreds of inmates returned to the workforce instead of to crime.
2. A tiny ray of light on the need for an authentic oversight regime within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Thomas Bartlett Whitaker. Thomas Bartlett Whitaker is the founder and editor of Minutes Before 6, a nonprofit literary journal for prison writers. He is a 3-time first-place winner in the essay and fiction categories of the Penn Prison Writing Contest and was named a Penn Writing for Justice Fellow in October 2018. His essay, A Nothing Would Do As Well, was included in the new press anthology, Hell is a Very Small Place. During his time behind bars, he graduated summa cum laude with a B.A. in Sociology and English from Adams State University and received his M.A. in Humanities from California State University. Whitaker is currently serving a life sentence in Texas and proposes to create independent monitoring boards in every detention center for sentencing accountability. Pretend you are in a cell. Seriously, just for one moment. Steel door, steel toilet, concrete walls, furry from a dozen paint jobs, with every paint flake racing to unpeel itself first. A tiny window, if you are lucky. Graffiti and burn marks cover everything, and there's an awful smell that you slowly begin to realize is coming from feces squirted into the vent, a gift left behind from a previous occupant. For a second, try to project yourself into that place. It is important to exercise your imagination. You have to be able to feel the sheer trepanning god-awfulness of this world before you can really begin to think about it. Perhaps this seems suspiciously sentimental, embarrassingly unacademic. You may be accustomed to there being a comfortable distance set between where you stand and what you study. We need to surgically remove that false sense of security you feel when you think about America's prison system. As Susan Sontag well knew, wherever people feel safe, they will be indifferent. And frankly, your indifference is killing us. I've read your monographs, your peer-reviewed journals, your white papers. My inner Spock appreciates your erudition, but you still aren't getting it. Not really. It's still not entirely real to you yet. You see the fish, and you see the harpoon plunging toward them through the water. But you are not taking the refraction angle into account. How do I know you aren't hitting your target? I know because things are getting worse instead of better. Day in, day out, the level of disorderliness in the system spirals downward, and all of you are still chuckling over prison rape jokes. Prison reform is jargon in your world. It is a fantasy in mine. A cruel, loathsome dream that punches me in the heart every single time I start to believe that someone out there might have a chance of changing anything. Focus on the cell. Say they dumped you in an ad seg wing, administrative segregation, a term for solitary confinement. Let's ignore the big questions about exactly why you find yourself in such a place. Let's stick to the minor issues you are going to be faced with, the daily annoyances that constitute and define a life in a Texas prison. I know you are going to be tempted to keep elevating your sight to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's whole essence, or Dasein, or whatever, but that is folly. Trust me. Nietzsche got more than a little wrong over the course of his oeuvre, but he was spot on when it came to the business of staring into abysses. All you have to do to know the truth is talk to a correctional officer with a few years of experience in these carceral depths. Trust me. You will understand what time in ADSEG means, and all its horrid truth within a few weeks of your arrival. Watch your feet for now. Take small steps, but be careful, because everything here is slippery. That guy screaming downstairs? Don't try to parse the actual content of his tirade, because he's insane. He needs help. In a blue state, he'd be in some kind of hospital. But down here in the Yeehaw Republic, we don't want to pay taxes for that sort of thing, so SEG is the rug under which we sweep such souls. Ignore him, and buy some earplugs. Keep going. Yes, it's winter now, and you still haven't received a jacket or a blanket. You can send all the I-60s in the world. But you're better off trying to buy what you need on the black market, the street, in patois. An I-60 is a Texas Department of Corrections form for any kind of request to an official, for example, a medical visit, a change in diet, or a contact visit. If you give up your rec and shower for a few days, the officers will break the rules and pass a jacket or blanket to you from one of the other convicts once you've come to an arrangement with someone. In the meantime, do some push-ups or something to stay warm. What else? No, don't even mention the chow. Nutritious and tasty food is for civilians, and you are a convict now. It wasn't that long ago that people like us were considered civiliter mortuos here in the South, dead to the law, literal slaves to the state, devoid even of the right to have rights. You aren't getting your medication. Your cell is infested with roaches, literally dozens of them, no matter which direction you face. You prepared an essay for publication, and when you tried to mail it out the first time, they disappeared it, immediately shipped you to a different unit, and then lost the portion of your property that contained your early drafts and supporting documentation. An officer wrote you a nonsense disciplinary citation because his boss instituted a quota. Welcome to the penitentiary. Now, how do you think you'll prove that any of these things actually happened to you, when the prison system itself is going to claim that you are a liar? I know what you are thinking. There has to be some sort of accountability structure in this wasteland of hostile indifference, right? Ah, yes. There's the rub. The purpose of this whole foray into fiction was to grind a single point into your face. There isn't a single policy change in the whole wide universe of reform discourse that you can propose, debate, lobby for, legislate, or codify into statute that matters in the tiniest way, unless the chasm between what exists on paper and what actually takes place inside the walls is bridged. Right now, that gap is astronomical. It is so wide that by the time light from your world reaches ours, it feels like it came from a star that died eons ago. The only way to connect these two realities is for the prisons in Texas to be forced to operate under the gaze of an independent monitor. Right now, the only people watching are the prisons themselves. I keep reading cheap cliches being tossed around in the newspapers about foxes guarding henhouses, which feels imbecilic to me. The truth is, we'd all love to deal with human foxes. Even rabid human wolves with lasers attached to their mutant snouts would be a vast improvement to what currently exists. What this means in practice is that policy equates to whatever the big man with the steel baton says it does, period. If you don't like what King Redneck I has to say about the matter, well, he's got a 5-man extraction team, a team of corrections officers who specialize in using force to remove individuals from their cells and searching for and confiscating
Sample complete. Ready to continue?